ConvertKit is a favorite email platform for creators. And today I want to show you how to set up a form using Astro to capture an email and add it to your subscriber list. Now we're going to do some cool stuff here. We're going to use React as an Astro island so it can be hydrated with JavaScript on request when it's needed. We'll then send that email over to a dynamic JSON endpoint that will be a post request using server-side rendering. That post request will then check to make sure that somebody has not already subscribed, and if they have, it'll give them a success message and tell them they've already subscribed. If they haven't subscribed, we'll go ahead and subscribe them, and then once again send them along a custom message. We'll also handle some basic errors as well, and I'll show you how to set all this up with ConvertKit. In the end, we'll deploy this to Netlify so you can actually see the entire thing from first build all the way to production. Now, whether or not you're interested in ConvertKit isn't super important. If you're interested in learning how to work with data in Astro, how to set up server-side endpoints that are dynamic, how to use React, Astro Islands, and how to interact with API services, then this tutorial is perfect for you. If you're interested in learning more about Astro, I've got an early access course currently being built in public called Learn Astro. You can find it at learnastro.dev, and the best part is right now it's only $50 in this early access phase. I hope you're ready to learn a lot about Astro and actually set up something with ConvertKit that you can actually use in production. You ready? Let's go. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. All right, let's go ahead and get started with a blank project. I'm going to start my terminal and just use the command npm create astro at latest. We'll call it ConvertKit example. It's going to ask if it can install the following packages, and I'll say yes. And let's go ahead and start with an empty project, and I'll plan to write in TypeScript. We'll use the strict setting, and I'll install the dependencies. Finally, we'll initialize a new Git repository and let it get up and running with the template. All right, let me open this up in my code editor, and I'll be right back with you. All right, I've got VS Code open on the left. I've got a browser open on the right. You can see that with this npm run dev command, I've got a very basic Astro site up and running. Now, I'm assuming you have a basic understanding of how Astro works, so we're going to focus primarily on implementation. Let me go ahead and start by adding some styling options. We'll do that with Tailwind. And again, you've got some really nice CLI help here with Astro. So I'm going to use npx astro add, and this is an integration officially, so I can just do Tailwind like this, and it will do all the work for me. So it will first of all ask if it can install some packages, and I'll say yes. Then it will generate a minimal Tailwind config file, and it will update my Astro config. Perfect. Now, because we're working with forms, I'm going to install the Tailwind Forms plugin just to make that styling a little bit more automatic. I have to install the dependency, and then I also need to add this right here inside of the plugins array. So let me open up my Tailwind config file, and I'm just going to add this directly here. Now, there is one other integration I want to add, and that would be React. Typically with a form like this, I would personally choose to use React, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'll do npx astro add, and again, this is an official integration, so I can just do React. And we're going to go through the same song and dance where it will install all the dependencies I need automatically for me, and it will go ahead and update my Astro config file and update my TS config as well. We are going to use one library for React, and that is this React Hot Toast. If I jump into the documentation, you can see I just have to add npm install React Hot Toast, and I'll go ahead and do that. All right, that's all we need to install. Let's go ahead and do npm run dev and get this thing back up and running. All right, so with all our dependencies installed and ready to go, I'm ready to go ahead and start adding the actual form. Now, we're going to have it all just on the homepage for now, since I'm just showing you how to do this, and you would obviously do this on whatever routes that you wanted them on. So let's go ahead and change this to just say something like subscribe to my blog. And I'm going to add some Tailwind classes to the body to put everything in the center. And I'll add a wrapper div around my h1 and what will eventually be my form that I'm going to put in right here. So let's go ahead and see this over here just to make sure everything is working. There we go. Subscribe to my blog, and eventually we'll have it down this way. Maybe we should add some classes here as well. There we go. Now it looks like a proper h1. All right, so let's go ahead and create our form component. That'll be the next thing we do. And I'm going to create this in a components directory. We'll just call this like subscribe form.tsx. I've got a snippet that can just create this automatically. So let's do it just like that. We're going to call this form. And then we'll keep it really basic where we're going to have a label. This will point to something called email. And we could just say enter your email. Now below here, we'll have an input with the type of email. And let's go ahead and name this email as well and give it that ID so that it connects it to this label right up this way. Lastly, we will need a button down here, so let's go ahead and add a button. By default, these should be a type of submit anyhow inside of a form, but I'll go ahead and manually add that, and we'll just say submit. Now, how do we get this on the actual index page? Well, we just import it like any other component. So I can come in here and do subscribe form, and you see the Astro extension gives me that automatically. There it is, imported, and now you can see it shows up right over here. Now, the first thing I want to do is add a little bit more styling, so let me go ahead and add some classes here. Now, even though the HTML is rendered here, Astro is actually doing all of that, but it's not yet interactive. So for instance, if I had an onSubmit handler here, and I said handle submit, we can go ahead and declare this up top here. And you can see I just have it preventing the default and then console logging submitting. If I come back over here and I try to add this, so like email@email.com, and I hit submit, you'll notice that it does just submit to the page, but it's not doing any of this stuff right here. That's because by default, when you import a component into an Astro file that needs JavaScript, it doesn't actually load the JavaScript with it automatically. So if I come back over here, and if we were to inspect the network tab and I refresh, you'll notice I don't have anything in here that's React based. I've got 34 requests. In order for this to be hydrated with the proper React that it needs, I need to add a client directive. So I can do something like client load. This will load it immediately upon page request. Now you see I get 41 requests, and if I were to comb through this, eventually you would see I have React inside of here. So now it's actually interactive. If I come back here just to make sure that this is clear and I close this out, we add back in email@email.com and I hit submit. You'll notice it does not submit. And if I come over here, it now will say submitting. Now, typically what I like to do is use the client visible. And what this does is if this is on the bottom of your page or out of view, it won't actually load the React until somebody scrolls to the point where they actually need to interact with the form. At that point, all the React will be loaded on the page. In this case, since it's in the middle of the page, that's going to happen no matter what. But this is what I typically like to do in Astro. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and come back over here. And now let's actually handle this in some way. Now, to give us a little bit more control, let's do two things. First of all, let's add a little bit of state. Here, I'm going to add an is submitting state. And all I want to do is come down to the button and add a disabled property and set this equal to is submitting. So if it is submitting, it cannot actually be interactive. Otherwise, it can be. So we'll toggle that when we're actually in the process of submitting. That means the very next thing I need to do here is say that if for some reason it is submitting, that would just return out of here. And then next, I want to set this to set is submitting. We're going to set this to true. So now it should only let us do this once. And then after that, it basically will not let us resubmit the form until we get around to setting this back to false. The second thing I want to do is grab reference to the actual form. We can do that with a ref in React. So I'm going to grab form ref. We're going to set this equal to use ref. I'm going to type this as a form element, and we'll just set the initial value to null. Now I'm going to come down here to the form. We're just going to add the ref and point this to form ref. This will allow us to reset the form programmatically when we submit the form. Now, once we're down here, I want to grab reference to the actual field we have. In this case, it would be our email field. Now we can do this in several ways, but since we gave this thing a name attribute, we can use the built-in JavaScript form data API. So let's call this form data, and then we'll set this equal to the new form data API, and we'll pass it the actual element, the form itself. In this case, it would be e.currentTarget. This should give us reference to anything that was submitted with the form. There are a couple different ways to get the values from here. In this case, I could grab the email, and this could just be from form data.get, and then I could just pass it email like that. However, I might have multiple things on this. I don't in this case, but what you could do in that case would say form inputs. I could just do object.fromEntries and pass it the actual form data right here. Reference to this right here, it will give me this all now as kind of a standard object. So if I grab this and I console log this down this way, we go ahead and add back in here email@email.com and submit it. You'll notice I now get an object that says email equals email@email.com. And if you have multiple things, you can grab all of those right off here, just like a normal JavaScript object. Now, we may want to make sure that this is required, just to make sure they cannot submit this form unless they've inputted some kind of email. Now, what I might want to do is come over here and just do a simple check. So first of all, let's make sure that email exists. So we could do something like if form inputs.email does not exist, then we could just go ahead and return. Now in this case, we probably don't want to return like this. We actually want to return with our hot toast. So that'll be the next thing we add here that we can kind of progressively add to as we move through here. So perhaps right here where we're setting this as submitting, let's go ahead and start with a hot toast. Now the way that this library works is you have to just import the actual toast and the toaster itself. The toaster just has to be available somewhere on your site on the page where the code is being run. So let's go ahead and import toast. And then we'll also import the toaster from React hot toast. Again, we have to output this toaster somewhere on the page. So let's go ahead and come down this way. And I'm actually just going to put it directly in the form because it's not visible anywhere. It just has to be on the page. And then we can use the toaster wherever we want. So perhaps let's come right over here right after we set it as is submitting. We can go ahead and create a variable called subtoast and set this equal to toast.loading. We'll just say something like submitting. So just to show you how this would work, if I come over here and do email@email.com and submit it, you'll see it says submitting. Now we haven't resolved this in any way, so it's just going to spin forever until I change this. So let's go ahead and refresh the page because we're going to want to update this as we move throughout the process. So if for some reason there is no form email, instead of returning nothing, I can return an update to that toast. And I can update this by just using the toast.error, and I can pass it whatever error message I want. So like, please provide an email address. Now, as a second optional object here, I can pass in an ID to an existing toast. And I've got that in my subtoast variable up here. So now it will update that subtoast right here and remove the submitting and replace it with this error message. Let's go ahead and just make sure that it works. So I'll actually reverse this. Come over here, we could say something like email@email.com, and now it should error out automatically because I have provided that. So that's what it's going to look like, and eventually it will self-dismiss. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and switch this back. The next thing I want to check is that the email is actually a valid email. Now we get some help in the HTML, but we actually want to handle this as well client side, right? So let's go ahead and validate the email. Now we're going to use this both client side, and we'll also use it server side. So what I'm going to do is come back over this way. Let's just go ahead and add a folder. We'll call it lib, and then we'll just have a file called validateemail.ts. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste in a function here that's very basic, but it just looks at this regex here and returns it true or false, whether or not it actually works for an email address. Now you probably want to do something more robust in production, but this is just a starter, and you can grab this from the code in the description. Now that means I can come over here and say if validate email, let's go ahead and grab that, and you can see how the Astro extension gives me this. Let's just make sure it pulled in. There you go. And I'm going to go ahead and pass in form inputs.email. We'll just say that if that is not valid, let's do the same exact thing. We're going to return something right here. And here we'll just say return a valid email address. Now we're getting a TypeScript error here because a input could be a file type as well. So for now, let's just go ahead and surround this here and say this is as string. And then let's go ahead and trim it once we know it's a string. That way it gets rid of white space on either side. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. If it's not a valid email, it will show us this right here. Again, just to make sure that this is working, let's go ahead and reverse this to make sure that it will work. And now you see it says, please provide a valid email address. So normally this would work. If it's not a valid email address, in this case it was, so it threw this error for us. All right, so we've done a lot client side to actually handle this. Now what we need to do is pass off the email to a backend endpoint. Now in Astro, you can set up these static file endpoints. You can see here I can use a TS or a JS extension, and with a basic kind of default, which is static site generation, you can see how you can just do a GET request and get whatever pre-built JSON exists. Now in our case, we actually want to be able to post to this and maybe do some other stuff inside of that. So I'm actually going to install an adapter to use SSR. Now in a moment here, we're going to deploy this to Netlify. So let me go ahead and come over here and let's go ahead and install the Netlify adapter. Once again, this is an official integration, so I can do npx astro add Netlify. Let's install the dependencies. Let's update our Astro config and let's get back up and running. Now, if I open up our Astro config, we're going to see that it's added a couple of things here. Output of server, and it's using the adapter of Netlify. What this means is every single route on our site will be server-side built, so that way it doesn't actually create the static HTML files, it creates the code used to build those static HTML files when somebody hits that route. However, I'm going to actually switch this up and set this to another option here, which is hybrid. This does the exact opposite. Every page on our site is automatically statically built. In other words, it's built into an HTML page and it's just sitting on the server. However, for any individual route, I can say, hey, don't pre-build this. Go ahead and build it live when somebody hits this route. Now, why would this be important? Well, on my Astro page over here, this index.astro, I want this just to be statically rendered. However, on my dynamic endpoint that we're going to build in a second, I want to be able to handle GET requests, POST requests, a bunch of other things dynamically. And for that to happen, it has to be server-side rendered. It cannot be statically built ahead of time. So if I scroll all the way down this way, you're going to see that I've got all the HTTP methods available to me when I'm using SSR. So I've got post and get and delete and all these things. Let's go ahead and capture this right here. And what I typically like to do is come into my pages directory. This is again where all the routing happens in Astro. And I like to create an API folder and then inside here, handle anything else. So for instance, I might have this as subscribe and I can do .json.ts. That works just fine. Now let's go ahead and paste these in here. And I do need to go ahead and pull in this API route from Astro. I can just do that with Control and Spacebar, and it should import this automatically if you have the Astro extension. So if I hit subscribe.json from any endpoint, it should get me back this if I just do a GET request, and it should get me back this if I do a POST request. So let's go ahead and do that now. So once we've gone ahead and checked that an email exists, and then we've validated the email, I'm going to come inside here and do a simple try catch. So first of all, let's go ahead and hit this as a GET endpoint. So I'm going to set this equal to res, and we'll just do a wait fetch, and then I'm going to hit API subscribe.json. Let's go ahead and do a quick check to say if the res.ok is not there, if it's not working, then we're going to go ahead and throw a new error. Then let's simply do a quick check where we check to see that we've got back an OK response. And if we haven't, we'll just throw a new error. We'll just say yikes. All right, and let's go ahead and handle this error down this way. Because TypeScript needs to know, let's go ahead and say that if this is an instance of an error, then we know what we have here, and I can pass along a toast.error, and the message will just be whatever the error message happens to be, and then I'll set this equal to my ID of subtoast. Again, this is the way that React Hot Toast works, so I can update the existing toast rather than creating a new one. I'll just update the message right here, and then it will self-dismiss. Let's also then console.error, and here we'll do the e.message. And since this may not be the most friendly message, maybe we should update this and just say, there was a problem subscribing you. Please try again. Now, for some reason, this is not an instance of error. I can come down here. We'll do the same thing, except in this case, I'll just console log the entire error right here, and we should be set to go. And I guess since we're duplicating this, we can just go ahead and do this up top here, and then just return here if this is a type of error. Lastly, you'll see that this is giving us an error, and that's because we need to mark this entire thing as an async function. That way we can do asynchronous work inside of here. So when they submit, it's going to check that they have a valid email. Then it's going to hit our endpoint right here. It's going to throw an error if it's not okay. And if it hits this error, this is the message it will send it back. So for instance, if I change this to something that doesn't exist, we should have this error message thrown right here. So let's go ahead and see if that's working. I'll submit this, and there we go. You'll see we get yikes down here, and here we just have our generic message right here. Now, of course, you have to spell things correctly, so let's change that, subscribing. And the last thing we'll want to do is make sure that we let this be enabled again, because at this point it is disabled. So right away, right after we catch the error, let's go ahead and set our is submitting back to false. And eventually we're going to have that as the last thing here in our try as well, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so once we get this back, assuming that we've actually hit this correctly, we're going to get back at the data, so let's go ahead and grab that data. I'm just going to call this something like success message. We'll say await res.json. And just to make sure we're getting it, let's go ahead and console log it. And now when I come back over here, I'll add email at email.com and submit this. Now you'll notice I get a get message, and that's because over here, this is what we have it returning. So let's do the same thing, except in this case, let's go ahead and add this as a post request. So I'm going to change the method here to post. And we do need to pass on some kind of body. So I'll JSON.stringify, and right now we'll just do nothing. And then finally, I'm going to add some headers. This just tells it that we're passing along content type of application JSON. So if I did that all correctly, now we're sending a post request, and we should get back at this right here. So there we go. I get this was a post. Now you'll notice that we still have this spinning, and that's because we have not updated it on success. So let's go do that next. So I'll come over here, and assuming we get this back correctly, let's go ahead and update our toast. So we're going to change it to a success type. Let's take our success message, and let's go ahead and add that as the text. And then here our ID again will be our sub toast. So we're going to update the actual toast message, assuming that we got this back correctly. There we go. So back over here, let's go ahead and do this again, email at email.com. And I'm passing this back as an object, but I should be an object with a property on it. We'll call that something like message. So let's try this again and submit. This was a post. The reason I had to add that message is that's the property we have right here, right? Now we want to change one other thing, and that is when we come down here after we submit it, we want to reset this so that it's no longer showing the email. Now we're going to actually pass back an error from the back end if this is not okay. So we should get this right here and should throw the error. So we know at this point, if it's gotten down here, we should have a successful message. So at this point, what I want to do is take my form. You might remember that was our form ref. And the way you reset this is by grabbing the current property and then just using the reset method. So in other words, I'm looking at the virtual DOM and using that to track across to the actual DOM in the page, and then updating that form to erase the inputs. In this case, I only have one, but if I had multiples, it would erase all of those. So if I come back here and do email at email.com and submit it, you'll see that it now empties it and gives me back my post message. All right, so just like that, we've done all the front end logic we need. The next thing we need to do is hook this all up to ConvertKit. Now for that, I'm going to come to my server over here. Now this subscribe.json.ts is server run. And you might remember that we said we needed to actually set this up with the Netlify adapter. Now to ensure that this endpoint is not pre-rendered, in other words, it's not a static JSON file, I need to actually add this export const pre-render equals false. This tells Astro to make this server-side rendered instead of statically generated. If you're interested more in the difference between these, I've done a video explaining the difference, and I'll make sure to link that up in the description. In this case, I do not need a get route. All I'm going to do is handle everything in this post route. Before we return anything, I need to go ahead and grab the actual data that I'm getting from the front end. So let's do another try catch here. And the first thing I'm going to do is grab the body that I get here, which I can do with await request.json. One of the really nice things about Astro is it uses a lot of web APIs so that you're not doing anything special. It's just using the platform, right? So let me come in here and add this as an async. That way you can do this awaiting right here. And let's go ahead and grab the email and just destructure this from the body that we get back. Just to show you how this would work, let's go ahead and console log this right here. If I come back over this way and I add back in my email at email.com and I hit submit, you'll notice here that I'm actually getting this readout right here. Now, this is an extension called Console Ninja, and it's showing it right here. Email is undefined though. Now, the reason this is happening is I'm not actually passing this along, which I kind of forgot to do. Right over here, didn't we have a fake message? Yeah, right here. So what I want to do in this case is actually pass along my form inputs.email. Now this is kind of annoying me. Instead of doing form inputs constantly, let's go ahead and just get this out right here. So let's say const email equals form inputs dot email. Then inside here, I can grab this and just change this to email. And I can grab this and change this to email as well. Now in this case, since I'm picking off that individual property of email, I don't actually want to send the email. Now that I think of it, I want to send the entire object, right? That would be the form inputs. So it will be an object with the property, the single property in this case of email. So now if I come over here and we add it back in our email address and I submit it and I jump back over this way, we should see that I actually get back email at email.com. So the structure of the object I'm passing along looks like this, where it has email, and then that would be equal to email at email.com. When I get this in the request, I go ahead and convert this to a JavaScript object, and then I pick off the individual property, and that's what I'm console logging right here. Now let's go ahead and do some of the same checks we did earlier. We can say that if there is no email, let's go ahead and throw a new error, and here we'll just do some random message. All right, so then down here in the catch, let's just check again that this E is an instance of an error, and then we can just return a normal response from this post request. So to perhaps make this easier on ourselves, let's just copy this and paste it right here. I'm going to go ahead and pass along null as the body, and then we'll just pass back a status. And you probably want to handle all these statuses differently, but in this case, I'm just going to say 400, and then we'll say the status text is equal to error.message. And then the status text will just be equal to the e.message. So I guess we should probably say that this has to say something like, please provide an email. Now, because we've got custom error messages on the front side, this isn't going to make a huge difference. And again, you may want to structure some of this differently. I just want to focus on ConvertKit and kind of the basics of setting something like this up. Now, what we could do is just drop this down this way and also return this in case there isn't something. In this case, I would do a custom message, something like there is an unexpected error. All right, so just to make sure that this is working, let's switch this around again and say if there is an email, then go ahead and throw this error, which should be caught right down here. So let's go ahead and do this. And you see it says there was a problem subscribing you, and down here it says yikes. And all this is because on the front end, that's how we've decided to handle this, which is why the error message here doesn't super matter right here. Of course, you may want to pass this back to the actual user, or maybe console log it a little bit differently down this way as well. But you can see here we were getting back the 400 response, and it's throwing this custom message here, which again, you could update with the backend message if you want to. Okay, so we know it's actually working. So we're getting an email. Let's go ahead and say something like check that email exists. And then we're going to do the same basic logic here. So let me jump back over here, and we can just copy a lot of this over. So we want to validate the email as well. So let's come over here and just validate the email. I need to go ahead and pull this in right here, validate email. And in this case, I don't need to return a toast or anything like that. All I need to do is throw an error. So once again, let's just copy this over, and let's go ahead and throw an error. Now we have already trimmed this on the front side, so we should be able to just come in here and add email like this. And it doesn't know it's a string, so I guess we could also say as string if we want to. That should pass it along to validate email, which is a string, and should give us back true or false. So just to be thorough, let's go ahead and check it real quick. And there we go. Okay, cool. All right, now we know we've checked everything on the front end. We've actually checked it on the back end as well to make sure that we've gotten what we expect. Now we need to actually send this along to ConvertKit. So if we think through the steps we want to do, first of all, we may want to check if the email is already subscribed. Next, we would want to subscribe the email. So assuming that they're not subscribed already, we'll subscribe them. Now, the way ConvertKit handles this is it gives you two different options, but we need to grab a bunch of variables to start with. So I'm going to jump over to my ConvertKit account. And if I were to look underneath the settings, which you get from right under here, settings right here, and I scroll all the way down, you're going to see I've got this advanced API tracking. Now I'm going to blur these out, but you'll see I've got an API key and I've also got an API secret. I'm going to need both of these. And I'm going to add these to a file over here, a .env file. Now, Astro's default get ignore should ignore this, and you just want to make sure that that's the case because you don't want to be committing this anywhere. You can see there we go right there. So inside here, I'm just going to give this a name. We'll call this like ConvertKit, and I'll call this API key. And then we're going to copy this down, do the same thing, except I will call this secret key. Again, I'm going to blur this out, but I'm just going to copy this one right here and add this right here. And I'm going to click show and do the same thing here. You don't want to share these with anyone. That's the reason we're doing this all server side. Because if this gets exposed, then anybody who has this key can basically do whatever they want. So I'm going to save that and close down the env file. Now let's go ahead and open the API documentation because here you can see a bunch of different things you may want to do. First thing we wanted to do is to check to see if the subscriber already exists. So we can list the subscriber. You'll notice that we have to pass along the API secret, and we can optionally pass along an email address. This will search to see if the subscriber is already valid. So I'm going to come up this way right here. We're just going to copy all of this right here, and this will be the URL that we use. You could also put this in a variable if you want to, but in this case, what we're going to do is just check to see if they are already subscribed. So let's go ahead and declare a variable. We're just going to call this subres. We'll say await fetch. I'm going to go ahead and paste in that URL we copied. Now notice I have to pass in my API secret right here. Now the way you do this in Astro is just by importing this from Vite. In order to use dynamic variables though, I'm going to need to change these to backticks. And then I just have to import .meta.env and then the name of the variable. In my case, it was ConvertKit secret key. Now the last thing I can do is pass along an email address, and this is what I want to do because it will just search it for me. I don't have to do any complicated thing here on the back end. So I'll simply add ampersand equals and then whatever my email is. Now the email I should have already gotten up top here, right here, and I validated it to make sure that it works. So we should get back a response that tells us whether or not the email already exists. So let's just grab that as subdata, and we'll await subres.json. And just to see what that says, let's go ahead and just console log this right here. Let's come back over here, and I notice here that I left my curl in the front there, so we should get rid of that. All right, now we'll go email@email.com, and I'll go ahead and submit that, and it should say this is a post, and I get back a response over here. Once again, I'm using Console Ninja. You'll see that I get a total subscriber equals 0, page 1, total 1, subscribers nothing. All right, so this tells me how many subscribers match my query, in this case for that email address, which I know means that if I have a 0, it means they have not subscribed, and if I have a 1, it means they have. So let's go ahead and come inside here. We could just rename this as something like is subscribed. This will just be equal to subdata.total subscribers. That was what we got back. And we'll just say if it is more than 0. So just to make sure that that makes sense, let's come in here and console log this. We'll also console log the subdata one more time. So I get back 2 responses here. This first one tells me that total subscribers is equals to 0. If I come over here, it's going to say that that means they are not subscribed. So it's that property that I'm getting back right here that I'm checking. So if it's 1, that means they have subscribed. If it's 0, it means they haven't. Now I'm only ever going to get back 1 person, and that's because I'm passing along an individual email address. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's get rid of this right here. And let's also get rid of this right here. So now we want to handle if they are subscribed, what we're going to do. So we'll just say if is subscribed, we're going to go ahead and return a new response. So new response. Here we're going to json.stringify a message. This message will say something like, and let's just go ahead and add like this party hat. And we'll say, you're already subscribed. And let's also pass back a status here of 200 and a status text of okay. Obviously, they're not subscribed yet because we don't have anybody subscribed yet. So let's just change this to true. And that way we know that this fires and we should get this passed back to the front end. So the way that this is going to work is when we come through all here and we hit this right here, we should eventually get back the success message, which we will then use to print to our toast, right? Success message.message, which is why we passed along an object with a message property. We should get you're already subscribed. Just like that, we're set to go. Okay, cool. So let's return this to the value it was at. And eventually we will test this to make sure it's working. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is to subscribe the person to the email. So if they're not subscribed, we want to subscribe them. So back over to the documentation. I'm going to pull over the sidebar just so we can see a little bit better. And I'm going to come over here to forms. Now what I want to do is add them to a particular form. These forms are created in the GUI on ConvertKit, and then you can add people individually to them. So the first thing I need to do is just check my form. So let's see, I believe it's under forms right here and landing pages and forms. So let's go ahead and create a form, and it doesn't really matter because I'm not going to use their GUI anyhow. Sure, that's fine. That's fine. Let's just publish it. Okay, perfect. All right, so what I need is this ID right here. This is the actual ID of the form, and we don't have to worry about any of this. So let's switch back to the settings just in case we need those, and now we've got access to the form ID. Now, this may be something you want to store in your environmental variable. That's totally fine if that's what you want to do. But you can see all I have to do is send a post request to this endpoint right here. All right, so let's go ahead and close this down, and then we're going to send it here. So let's just do const res equals await, and we're going to fetch, and we'll send this whole thing along. And once again, I need to get rid of this curl and all this right here. And then I just need to take my form ID and add it directly in here. Now you might remember that this is a post request, so we need to make sure we have a method of post on here. And then let's add a headers. And this will be content type of application JSON. And then we'll also set the character set. Finally, I need to actually pass along the body, and you can see that right over here. This is the first thing we did, add this. Now we need to actually add the body right here. Now we can add tags and things like that. The only thing that's required is this email property. Now, I'm not sure what I was doing here. This needs to be body like this. And then I'm going to pass along json.stringify. So we're going to convert this to a string, and this will be an object with these values right here, right? So let's have API key, and we'll import our API key. That will be the same thing we did for our secret. So import.meta.env, and then the name of the key. So that's ConvertKit API key. And then we need to pass along the email. And in this case, since it's an object, email equals email, we can just pass along just like this in JavaScript, and that should work just fine. Now let's do the same kind of check right here, which we probably should have done up top as well, but we could say if res.ok, then we'll just throw a new error. This time we'll say big yikes. Again, we're not handling that on the front end in any way, so it doesn't really matter what we do, it's just going to throw an error. Down here, let's go ahead and convert what we get back from ConvertKit. So I'm going to say const res text equals, we'll do await res.json. Now, if you were to look through the documentation here, it's going to tell you that it'll either pass back a success message or an error message. I don't remember exactly where this is at, but we can check off the res text and say if it has a .success, then we know it's successful. If it has a .error, we know it was not successful. So here we could just say if res text .error, so if that property exists on what we get back, again, we can throw a new error, and we might as well take the actual res text .error .message in case you want to handle this in some different way on the front end and pass it along. At this point, we can pass back another success message. So let me come back up here. Let's just go ahead and grab the same thing we used for is subscribed, and we'll just update the text. So where are we at? Right here. So after we've checked to make sure that there's not an error, we can come in here and let's go ahead and drop in this eye emoji and say like, thanks, please check your email to confirm your subscription. All right, so before we test all of this, let's go ahead and check what we're doing one more time. When we submit the form, we're going to go ahead and capture it in this handle submit. In the front end, what we're going to do is first of all check that an email actually exists on the form itself. We're going to do that right here. Then we're going to validate that the email is the actual valid email address. You may also want to sanitize the input in some way, but I'll leave that to you. Then we're going to go ahead and hit our custom endpoint with a post request where we're going to send along the full object of the form inputs. In this case, it happens to just be an email, but you may be passing along other things as well. If there's an error hitting that, we'll go ahead and throw an error. Otherwise, we'll grab the success message that we get back and display this in the toast, updating that success message. At that point, we will reset the form and set is submitting to false so we can resubmit that form if we need to. If there is an error, we will go ahead and show a toast error message and console log that as well. Now, what happens when we hit our custom endpoint right here? Oh, right here. Well, right over here, what we're going to do is grab the body from the request. So we're going to get the email itself. We're going to make sure that it exists. We're going to validate the email server side. And now that we know we have a valid email, we're going to go ahead and check to see if the email is already subscribed. If when we pass along the email, we get back they are subscribed, we'll just go ahead and pass back a success message that says, hey, you're already subscribed. Now that we know they're not subscribed, we can go ahead and subscribe them. We're going to subscribe them to our form by sending our post request, where we're going to send along our API key and the email address. At that point, we're going to check that we get back a successful message, which we could probably also update up here like I mentioned. So maybe let's do that real quick while we're thinking about it. And here we're going to say subres. And you may want to rename these to something else, but we're going to make sure that that's okay. But we're going to make sure that we get back a successful response. If we do, we're going to go ahead and grab the text from that and make sure that it does not have an error property on it. If it does, we'll throw a new error message. Otherwise, we'll just return this response where we say, hey, thank you so much. Check your email to confirm your subscription. For any errors that may occur, we're going to go ahead and throw this error message. Okay, so with all that said, let's go ahead and come over here. I'm going to add my actual email address at chris@codinginpublic.dev. Let's go ahead and submit this. All right, all that, and it looks like we have some kind of an error. Now, this is where passing along actual useful error messages may be helpful. So we might want to come in here and say like subscribing failed or something like that. And then maybe console log this down here. Even if we don't pass it along to the front end, we could at least console log it. So I could say console.log, e.message, and let's see what the problem is. So here we figure out that the subscribing failed. So we know there's something the matter with our post request right here. Now, I took a few seconds to look through this and I realized I left off this semicolon, stupid semicolons. I think that's all we have to do. Let's come over here and check. There we go. So thanks, your email has confirmed. If you missed this and are beating your head against the wall, I apologize. So here's my actual email client. You can see here that I've got this email, and if I click this, it should confirm my subscription. And there we go. We're officially on the list. All right, you know what that means? If I come back over here and re-add my email address, it should now check and tell me I've already subscribed. There we go. I've already subscribed. And if I jump over here to my account and I jump over this way and I look at my audience, wherever they're at right here at the subscribers, you can see that I've got one right here that has been subscribed. Now, sometimes you'll have people who sign up, but they don't actually confirm their subscription. It will still return false here for a subscribed. So basically, if they've sent it in and have not confirmed their subscription, then it will go ahead and just send them another subscribe email down this way. I hope that was a big help to get you started using Astro, these server-side endpoints. Now what I want to do is just go ahead and send this up to GitHub. Once I send it to GitHub, I can go ahead and build this as an actual site. So let me come over here to the GUI, and I'll just go ahead and commit this. Now, depending on how you have VS Code set up, you can go ahead and publish a branch directly here. But the way I have it set up, I'm going to need to come over here and create a new repository. We'll just say like convert kit Astro example, and I'll go ahead and create this as a public repository. Now, because I've gone ahead and already committed everything, I'm just going to copy this command right here, and I'll paste it in here and just push everything up. So if I come over here and refresh, all that code should be right here. All right, the next thing I need to do is come over to app.netlify.com, and I'm going to go ahead and log in with GitHub, and let's go ahead and add a new site. So I'm going to import an existing site. We're going to choose GitHub, and I'll just search for ConvertKit. All right, right here, this is the one we want. It should grab everything I need here, and you can see that it does a pretty good job. So let's go ahead and deploy ConvertKit. All right, it looks like it has finished. Let's go ahead and look at the site configuration. And actually, no, it's the domain management I want to look at. Let's go ahead and edit this site name. We'll do like Astro ConvertKit example and save right here. Now, if I go ahead and open this up, there we go. We can actually subscribe to the blog. And we'll go ahead and do Chris at codinginpublic.dev and submit it right there. Now, you'll notice we're going to have a problem subscribing, and that's because the environmental variables we never pushed up to Netlify, so it doesn't have access to those. In fact, if I were to come back over here, you can see that. If I go underneath site configuration, we go to environmental variables, you can see that no environmental variables have been set for this site. Now, there's two ways to fix this. One is to use the Netlify CLI, which I don't want to get into right now. The other thing is to manually add these variables. Now, I can go ahead and import these from my .env file. So what I'm going to do is open it up over here, copy those, and add them in right here. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so I've gone ahead and pasted those in and blurred them out, and we'll just import those variables. Now let's go ahead and come back to the deploys right here. We're going to grab this production deploy right here, and just go ahead and redeploy this by clearing the cache first and then redeploying it. All right, hopefully if that worked correctly, we can come over here and refresh. I'll add back in my email address and submit, and it'll say you're already subscribed. Now, if I add another email address like chris@learnastro.dev and submit this, you'll see that it now says to check your subscription. Again, if you're interested more in learning Astro, you can check out my full project-based course called Learn Astro. Right now, I'm at an early access discount of just $50. That will go up as I complete each section. I'm almost done here with section 1. I've got 2 more sections planned for a total of at least 15 hours of content. I hope that was a huge help, not only in understanding ConvertKit, but also in understanding how Astro works. Plus, in the end, you've got something that you can actually use to capture real client email addresses and then actually send them emails with ConvertKit. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.